Well, welcome back to the Life Course. I'm so pleased you're up for continuing in what is the second week of a 6-week course, looking at the opening chapters of John's Gospel, one of the 4 eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. And this time we're back in the opening few sentences that we began with last time. Just before we read it again, have a look at the words to my right. And can you see they're all really important things? I wonder, which do you think is the most important? If you had to order them, rank them in a kind of hierarchy of importance, which would you put at the top? And then what about second? Let me leave you to have a discussion just for 2 or 3 minutes. Which ones do you think are the most important? And then read the passage and we'll continue together again in a moment. Well, have you read the passage? Let me read verse 9 again. John says, "The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world." I'm recording these videos during the COVID-19 outbreak. And it's at times like this, isn't it, that we really have begun to appreciate what matters in life. So that little exercise that perhaps you discussed with your friend, it's not easy, is it? We love our family, we need our family. It's at times when we can't see our family, we really begin to appreciate that. Of course, the internet, imagine going through this COVID-19 period without the internet. Well, all of these things, very important. Food, of course. But I imagine light wasn't one of the first things we thought to put at the top of our list. But of course, I'm sure we'd all agree light is a great thing. I wonder, were you here at Christmas last December? I love it. It's one of the things I most enjoy about that season, all the lights all over the place. Because I'm aware that many of you have come from some of the great cities of the world where there are always wonderful lights. I love the view of Hong Kong or Shanghai, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Tokyo. I'm so privileged to have been to those wonderful cities with wonderful lights. But of course, light isn't just beautiful. Light is essential. A world without light, what a horrific prospect. I mean, just imagine being on the underground and suddenly the electricity goes off. It's a frightening prospect. Or imagine waking up one day and the sun hasn't risen and it doesn't rise. I guess some of us probably think that that's what life's like in the UK anyway. Light is essential. Well, last time we saw, didn't we, that the world is in the dark. I'm going to read verse 18 one more time. "No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known." No one has seen God. We can't see him. That's what we thought about last time. The world is in the dark. Well, let me try out a thought experiment. Can you guess what is going on in my head? Who am I thinking about at the moment? You're in the dark, aren't you? You're in a state of ignorance. Yes, you can make perhaps some intelligent guesses. Perhaps I'm thinking about the person I just spoke with. Perhaps I'm thinking about you. But it's just a theory. You're in the dark until, that is, I reveal to you the truth. Well, that's what we saw last week. No one has ever seen God. Come back into my head. See if you can work out who I'm thinking of. I'll give you a few clues. He was born in 1918. Well, that doesn't make it that much easier, does it? Let me tell you, he died in 2013. He spent 27 years in prison. You got there yet? He became the first black president of South Africa. Yes, that's right. Nelson Mandela. Well, imagine a biography of Mandela. I'm sure there are many different biographies. They could all start from different points in Nelson Mandela's life. So you might get one biography that begins with his birth, or perhaps before his birth, with his parents. You might have a biography that begins during his time in prison. Or perhaps it begins at the moment when he's made president. They could begin in different points. Well, last week we began this journey looking at John's account of the life of Jesus, one of the 4 biographies of Jesus. And interestingly, each of the biography begins at a different point in Jesus's life. So Matthew begins with the family tree of Jesus. Mark begins at the beginning of Jesus's work 3 years before he went to the cross. Luke begins with the birth narrative and that first Christmas. Well, how about John? Do you remember how John began? Well, we just read it, didn't we? Before the beginning of the creation of this world, before there was anything, there was God and God alone. And Jesus was there. The Word we saw last week, do you remember, was with God. The Word was God. No one's ever seen God. And yet, this is the big claim we saw last time. Jesus has made God known. It's a big claim. No longer are we in the dark, Christians believe. But the question is, how do people respond to the light coming into the world? This evening, we're going to consider 2 different responses to the light. 2 different responses at the time of Jesus coming into the world, and 2 different responses we continue to see 2,000 years later. And we're going to look at the first response now that you'll find in sentences 9 to 11. Let me leave you to discuss those sentences for 10 minutes or so. Light is a great thing, isn't it? My children, when they were really young, certainly agreed with that. When they were trying to sleep, or perhaps they were sleeping and then they had a nightmare, light provided wonderful comfort. We'd come in and it's okay, that monster isn't really there. Light is comforting. Light is a wonderful blessing. But I think my children will be very quick to agree that actually light was also something they didn't want at times. So when we were out and we had babysitters, people looking after the children, and, you know, like everyone, the children thought they'd have some fun and be a bit naughty, and they were in the dark, and then suddenly the babysitter comes in, the light exposes the fact that they're not in bed. Well, I wonder what you thought about the response to the light coming into the world that we just looked at in those sentences 9 to 11. Let me read verse 11 again. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. In many ways, what we see in these first 18 verses of John's account acts a bit like a trailer. You know what I mean? When you go to the cinema and you see a short clip of a film that gives you an idea of what the film is like. You don't understand everything, but it makes you think, I want that will be developed in the rest as I go and see the film. And that's what we're getting in these first 18 verses. Lots of ideas that we then see developed through the book. And this is one big idea we see, that God's own people reject Jesus. The light comes into the world. They don't receive the light. 2 different responses. And this first one is incredible rejection. God's own people. I mean, how's that possible? They had been waiting for the light to come. If you've ever read the Old Testament or bits of Jewish history, you'll know that they understand themselves as the chosen people of God, that God had promised to bless them and to give them a land and to bring them back into a perfect world under God's rule, enjoying blessing. And so if God's chosen people reject Jesus, why should we, if we're not Jews, receive him? So we need to understand the reason behind their rejection. And to help us understand that, I want us to picture a situation. Well, imagine Taobao started to operate in the UK. I mean, maybe they already do, I'm not quite so sure. But suppose they open their UK headquarters right next to St. Helens, perhaps in the Gherkin, one of the other great skyscrapers around us. And just imagine the senior executive board have been meeting all morning. They've gone out for a coffee break and they're on their way back, and they see through the glass door that there's a young man, maybe even a boy, someone looking at the computer. In fact, he can see that he has a memory stick. What's he doing with the computer of the senior leadership? They're horrified, understandably. They come in and say, "What are you doing? Who do you think you are?" And do you know what this young boy says? "I am the son of Jack Ma." Immediately, they call for the security guards and they throw him out of the building. Why are they so extreme? Then they realize he's the son of Jack Ma. Can't they see? Can't they recognize that he really is? He's not just making it up. He even looks like Jack Ma. That's the problem, because they realize that they are going to be exposed. If he's taking files from the computer, it will reveal to Jack Ma that they haven't been doing what he asked them to do. It will show the corruption that is at the heart of the company. Now, I realize this is just a made-up scenario, but can you see what's going on here? There'll be evidence that they have ignored the owner, and they're caring more about their own success and honor. Friends, the Jews knew that they were special, that they'd been born into God's special people. They had this right. And yet the reality is they cared more about their own honor than the honor of God himself. And read on in John, and we discover that the response of the Jews is actually the response of all people, that they are acting like the world. For the world prefers to live in the darkness. And when the light comes, we run away. A bit like, imagine when you go into the countryside, you pick up a log in a wood or a big stone, and what happens? All those little creatures scurry away. And human beings, the Bible says, respond to the light in the same way. Incredible rejection. It's a shocking response. And yet it's not the only response. Let's turn back with our friend to have a look at verses 12 and 13, and then I'll come back for a final concluding talk. Well, we saw in the last session that John's written this book to persuade us something about Jesus, that we might receive life. Well, what does this life involve? I hope you can see that we've already begun to get a hint that this life involves a relationship, intimate relationship. I said there were two big responses we see to the light coming into the world. We saw incredible rejection. Well, here we're seeing intimate relationship offered to those who receive Jesus. Think back to the Taobao UK headquarters again for a moment. Just imagine if you really did have intimate relationship with this young man who turns out to be the son of Jack Ma. I don't even know if he has a son, but imagine he does. And imagine you know him personally. Imagine you visit China. You wouldn't need to worry about getting on the airport bus to find a hotel. No, he would collect you from the airport. Perhaps he would even fly you in a personal jet to a particular villa that he owns. I've no idea. But what a privilege it would be to know him. You wouldn't need to worry about, have you got enough money to enjoy your time visiting that wonderful country of China, because he would look after you. Intimate relationship. Well, friends, that is nothing compared to the incredible blessing of being a child of the Creator, the one who made it all. And read on in John, and we see something of the beauty of what it is to have intimate relationship with God himself. Notice in these verses how it's not something we're born into. So that's a misunderstanding I often find friends have about the Christian faith, that you're born a Christian. No, you can't be born a Christian. My children have grown up in a Christian family, but that doesn't make them Christian. No, you have to be born again. And it's to all those who receive Jesus. Now, this is not something we inherit. This is a gift we receive, an incredible privilege to become a child of God. Now, in many of the countries that we've grown up in, privilege is sometimes seen as a bad thing. Some people seem to have access to things whereas most of us don't, if we don't have that privileged relationship. But I hope you can see in these verses that this is open to all, whoever receives. Well, let me encourage you to ask your Christian friend something of how good it is to be a child of God, to have this kind of intimate relationship with the one who gives us life. Before I do that and leave you to ask any questions, let me make a few final concluding comments. Jesus, the light, has entered into our dark world. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on how we respond. Yes, by nature we run from the light, but God wants us to receive life. He offers us relationship, intimate relationship with him. Yet the question remains, why should we believe? Consider last week the following sentence. So verse 14, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. We've seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Well, who are the we? Why should we trust them? What is it that persuaded John and these others? What is it that convinced them that Jesus really can offer intimate relationship with the Father? Well, read on, please. Read on from verse 19 and see if you can get to the end of chapter 1, because next time we're going to continue on from chapter 2. But read the second half of chapter 1 and you'll see why it is we can have confidence to believe. We'll see why it is we'll want to read beyond into chapter 2 and the rest of the book. Thanks so much for joining me for this second session of the Life Course. I very much look forward to joining you again in our next session.